When people hear the words Middle East, many immediately think about modern conflicts, oil, or politics. But the truth is, the story of this region goes much deeper than that. Long before skyscrapers, modern borders, or even the idea of countries existed, the Middle East was the place where some of the most important chapters of human history began. In fact, many historians call this region the cradle of civilization, because some of the earliest cities, inventions, and organized societies appeared here thousands of years ago. To understand why, we have to go back nearly 5,000 years. Imagine a world where most humans still lived in small villages, hunting animals and gathering plants to survive. Large cities didn't really exist yet. Writing didn't exist either. But in a region between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, something remarkable started happening. This area, known as Mesopotamia, became the birthplace of some of the first true cities in human history. The word Mesopotamia itself actually means the land between two rivers. Those rivers were incredibly important because they provided water for farming in an otherwise dry environment. Over time, people learned how to control the river water using irrigation systems, allowing them to grow crops regularly. This may sound simple today, but at the time, it was a revolutionary idea. Stable food supplies meant people could settle in one place instead of constantly moving around. As villages grew larger, they slowly transformed into cities. Some of the earliest cities, like Ur, Uruk, and Babylon, appeared in this region. These places were not just clusters of houses. They had governments, laws, temples, markets, and complex social systems. In other words, they looked surprisingly similar to early versions of modern societies. One of the most important inventions in Mesopotamia was writing. Around 3200 BC, people developed a system called cuneiform, which involved pressing symbols into clay tablets using a small reed tool. At first, writing was mostly used for record-keeping things like tracking crops, trade, or taxes, but over time it allowed people to record stories, laws, and knowledge. Without writing, history would be almost impossible to preserve. Another major development in this region was one of the earliest legal systems in history. Around 1750 BC, a Babylonian king named Hammurabi created a famous set of laws, known today as the Code of Hammurabi. These laws were carved into stone and displayed publicly so everyone could see them. Some of the rules may sound harsh by modern standards, but the idea itself was revolutionary. The belief that society should be governed by written laws. Over time, many powerful empires rose and fell across the Middle East. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Persians all built vast empires that controlled huge areas of land. Their armies, trade networks, and cultures shaped the ancient world for centuries. But what made the Middle East especially unique was not just its civilizations, it was also its location. The region sits at the crossroads of three continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. Because of this, people, goods, and ideas constantly moved through the area. Traders carried spices, metals, fabrics, and knowledge across deserts and mountains, connecting distant parts of the world long before modern transportation existed. And this was only the beginning. In the centuries that followed, the Middle East would become the birthplace of powerful religions, massive empires, and global trade routes that would shape the course of human history. The story of this region was just getting started. As civilizations grew in the Middle East, something else began to develop that would shape human history just as much as cities and empires. This region also became the birthplace of some of the world's most influential religions. In fact, three of the major religions followed by billions of people today, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all began in this same part of the world. To understand why, it helps to picture the Middle East not just as a place of cities and kingdoms, but also as a crossroads of cultures and ideas. For thousands of years, people from different tribes, languages, and traditions traveled through the region. In the middle of all this movement, new spiritual ideas began to grow. The story begins with Judaism, one of the oldest monotheistic religions in the world. Monotheistic simply means the belief in one God. Jewish tradition traces its origins back nearly 4,000 years to a man named Abraham, who is believed to have lived somewhere in the ancient Middle East. According to religious tradition, Abraham made a covenant or sacred agreement with God. This idea of one universal God guiding human life was very different from the many god systems that were common in ancient civilizations. Over time, the Jewish people formed a strong cultural and religious identity centered around their traditions, laws, and sacred writings. The city of Jerusalem became especially important in Jewish history, and it remains one of the most sacred cities in the world today. Centuries later, another religion would grow from this same cultural and historical background. Around 2,000 years ago, a Jewish teacher named Jesus of Nazareth began preaching messages about compassion, forgiveness, and spiritual renewal. His teachings eventually became the foundation of Christianity. After his death, Jesus' followers spread his message across the Roman Empire and beyond. What started as a small religious movement in the Middle East eventually became the largest religion in the world. Today, billions of Christians across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and many other regions trace their spiritual roots back to events that took place in this relatively small area of land. But the story of religion in the Middle East does not stop there. In the 7th century, a new religious movement began in the city of Mecca, located in present-day Saudi Arabia. A man named Muhammad began receiving revelations that Muslims believe came from God. These teachings were later written down in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Within just a few decades, Islam spread rapidly across the Middle East and beyond. Muslim communities expanded into North Africa, parts of Europe, and large areas of Asia. This expansion was not only religious, it also created powerful civilizations known as Islamic caliphates. During what historians often call the Islamic Golden Age, cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo became centers of science, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Scholars translated ancient Greek texts, made discoveries in astronomy, and developed new medical knowledge that influenced both Eastern and Western societies. Because of these three religions, the Middle East holds an extraordinary spiritual significance for much of humanity. Cities such as Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina are considered sacred places visited by millions of pilgrims every year. But the importance of the Middle East was never only about religion. The region was also home to powerful empires and major trade routes that connected different parts of the world. And as time moved forward, new empires would rise, some so large that they would control territories across 3 continents. As religion spread and societies became more organized, the Middle East continued to grow in importance. One of the main reasons was its geography. The region sits between Europe, Asia, and Africa, which made it a natural meeting point for traders, travelers, and armies for thousands of years. Long before airplanes or modern ships existed, people were already moving goods across deserts, mountains, and seas through this region. Some of the most famous trade routes in history passed directly through the Middle East. One of them was the Silk Road, a vast network of trading paths that connected China and East Asia to Europe and the Mediterranean world. Through these routes, merchants carried silk, spices, precious metals, perfumes, and many other goods. But trade was not only about products. Ideas also traveled along these roads. Technologies, scientific knowledge, and cultural traditions spread between civilizations because of these connections. Because of its strategic location, powerful empires constantly competed to control the region. One of the most influential empires in ancient history was the Persian Empire. At its height, the Persian Empire stretched across an enormous area, from parts of modern-day India all the way to Egypt and parts of Europe. The Persians built advanced road systems and organized administrative structures that helped manage such a large territory. Centuries later, new empires rose in the region. One of the most powerful was the Ottoman Empire, which began in the late 13th century. The Ottomans slowly expanded their control across the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of southeastern Europe. By the 16th century, they ruled one of the largest and most powerful empires in the world. Under Ottoman rule, cities like Istanbul, Damascus, and Cairo became major centers of culture, trade, and politics. The empire controlled important sea routes and land routes connecting Europe and Asia. For hundreds of years, the Ottomans maintained stability across large parts of the Middle East. However, no empire lasts forever. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Ottoman Empire began to weaken. Internal problems, economic struggles, and rising nationalism in different regions made it difficult for the empire to stay united. Then came World War I, a global conflict that would completely reshape the map of the Middle East. During the war, the Ottoman Empire sided with Germany and its allies. When the war ended in 1918, the empire collapsed. European powers, especially Britain and France, became heavily involved in the region. New borders were drawn, often without much consideration for the local populations living there. Many of the modern countries we see on the map today, such as Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, were formed during this period. The decisions made at that time would influence the region's politics for generations. Even as political control changed, the Middle East remained extremely important to the rest of the world. Its location still connected continents, and its cities continued to be centers of culture and commerce. But in the early 20th century, something else was discovered beneath the region's deserts, something that would transform the global economy and change the Middle East's role in world affairs forever. That discovery was oil. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Middle East was already important because of its history, trade routes, and cultural influence. But very few people knew that deep beneath the deserts of the region was a resource that would soon change the world economy. That resource was oil. The first major oil discoveries in the Middle East began in the early 1900s. At the time, oil was becoming extremely valuable because modern industries and transportation systems depended on it. Cars, airplanes, factories, and ships all needed fuel. As global demand for oil grew, countries began searching for new places to find it. Huge oil reserves were discovered in places like Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. At first, many of these oil operations were controlled by foreign companies from Europe, and the United States. But over time, local governments began taking more control of their own resources. Oil quickly became one of the most powerful economic forces in the region. Some countries, especially in the Persian Gulf, experienced dramatic transformations. Cities that were once small fishing villages or desert towns grew into modern urban centers filled with skyscrapers, highways, and massive airports. Places like Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi became symbols of rapid development and wealth. Oil also gave Middle Eastern countries significant influence in global politics. In 1960, several oil-producing nations, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait, helped create an organization known as OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. By working together, these countries could influence global oil production and prices, which affected economies all around the world. However, the region's modern history has also been complicated. Political tensions, wars, and disagreements over borders and resources have shaped many events in the Middle East during the past century. Conflicts in places such as Iraq, Syria, and other parts of the region have drawn international attention and affected millions of people. But focusing only on conflict would give an incomplete picture of the Middle East. The region is also home to rich cultures, ancient traditions, and growing innovation. Many countries are now investing in education, technology, tourism, and new industries that go beyond oil. For example, several Gulf countries are working on large development projects aimed at building future economies based on science, renewable energy, and global business. Cities like Dubai have become international travel hubs connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa, continuing the region's long tradition as a crossroads of the world. Meanwhile, the Middle East still holds deep historical importance. Some of the world's oldest cities are located here, and millions of people travel to the region every year to visit cultural landmarks, historical sites, and religious centers. Looking back across thousands of years, it becomes clear that the Middle East has played a remarkable role in shaping human civilization. It gave rise to the first cities, the first writing systems, powerful empires, major religions, and global trade networks. Later, it became a central player in the modern energy economy. In many ways, the story of the Middle East is really the story of human development itself. It is a region where ancient history and modern change exist side by side. And as the world continues to evolve, the Middle East will likely remain one of the most important and influential regions on Earth.